Hi, everyone. Your first essay that you're writing for English composition is your process analysis essay, which is essentially a how-to essay. And there are two types of process analysis. There are process analyses written for people who will actually perform the process. So think about user manuals. You buy a new desk and it comes with a user manual that tells you how to put it together. That is an example of a reader performing the process. Whereas there are pieces written for people who just want to understand the process. Maybe they are in the market for a new desk, they're not ready to purchase, but they read a user's manual to determine how hard it is to put together and what kinds of equipment they will need. So when you have these two types of readers, your writing style will be a little bit different. So if you are writing a process and you know that the people will be directly following your instructions, you want to be a little bit more specific. So you can often have people who are novice, meaning they've never done something, or they're experts in the field that you're writing about. You want to provide enough detail that the reader can easily carry out the process. I think about good recipes that I've read and bad recipes that I've read. The good ones tell you everything up front. They tell you how long it's going to take, they tell you how many ingredients you need, and they tell you how many steps there will be. The bad ones have some of the ingredient information buried in the heart of the process itself. So by the time you get there, you realize, oh no, I did not have that lemon that I need, and I didn't see it mentioned up at the top. So we need to know up front before we get into a procedure the equipment we need, and it's good to know about how long something's going to take. So when I became a technical writer, which was my first job out of college, I had to do an interview with a software company, and one of the writing tests that they had me do was to imagine that I'm writing directions for someone to start a vehicle who has never driven before. And so they put me in a room, they gave me about a half an hour, and they asked me to write that out. And when I'm teaching this class face to face, I ask students to do the same thing. I give them about 10, 15 minutes, and then we share the results, and I kind of pantomime my way through pretending to get into a pretend car. But you often will see that there are things that we forget. We forget to mention the fact that we have to open the door. And we have to recognize, is this a car that requires a key, or is it a car that requires some kind of keyless entry? We need to do things like putting on our seatbelt and making sure that the car is in park, that we have our foot on the brake. So all of these things that go into what probably for most of us is a pretty rote, pretty ordinary process that we don't really think about would obviously be new and maybe a little intimidating to someone who's never driven before. So when you're writing a process analysis, you have to take into account that there will be readers who have never done your process, are maybe a little intimidated or fearful of it, and want to learn more from what you're writing about. When you have readers who are observers, you don't necessarily have to be as detailed because the assumption is they're not going to take your instructions and right away go do it. So maybe they're just curious about a process, they want to learn a little bit more about it, they want to read more about it before they actually perform it. So people who are readers don't need as much detail, or excuse me, people who are observers don't need as much detail. People who are performing your process need more. So when we talk about process, we want to be ethical. We don't want to give any misleading or incorrect information because we want to assume that our readers will be at some point, hopefully, following our process. And because you are the author, you have to assume the role of authority. You have to speak from a place of experience. So if you are going to be writing about choosing a major for college, what was the process that you went through? Did you talk to friends and family? Did you do some research online? Did you meet with a counselor? Did you visit schools? Did you do job shadows? So talk about your own personal experience in this essay. In this particular essay, I'm encouraging you to draw from your own personal experience. So you will be allowed to use I, me, my pronouns, and you're going to directly address the reader using you and your. This is abnormal for most essays that you write in college because we very rarely directly address our reader with you and your, and I usually try to get you to get rid of your you addresses in the rest of your essays. But this first one, we're going to start off directly talking to our reader. So I have an example here of an issue of ethics. As a technical writer, I knew that my documentation was going to the end user, the people that bought the product that my company sold. And so it had to be tested. It had to be quality assurance tested. It had to go through a team who would read through it, make sure that it was accurate, and that it would not hurt anyone, because we would be liable if it did. So there's a lot that rides on, especially if you go on to be a person who writes the materials for your company that go out to other employees or other end users like customers. When you begin writing your process analysis, I would like you to just start making an informal list. So 1, 2, 3, 4, what are the steps that go into this process? Again, this is kind of like brainstorming or listing. So if I wanted to, let's say, write about how to succeed in college, it might not be a sequential list. It could just be a list of items that I think as I come to them of what it means to be successful. So it means time management skills. It means being able to access the materials readily. It means being able to ask questions. It means being able to know who my resources are when I need to go buy my books or I need to go talk to someone about financial aid. So brainstorm a list, and again, it could be bulleted or numbered, and then try to put them in some kind of order. If you are doing something like putting together a desk, obviously there's this very specific order that you have to go in. But if you're talking about being successful in college, well, it's more of a category. It's more of different types of tools or qualities that you want to possess in order to be successful. So there's not necessarily a 1, 2, 3, 4 that is entailed in that, but maybe a chunking or a grouping of the characteristics that are required for it. So you get to decide how you arrange it. Maybe you arrange it from the most important to the least, or maybe you reverse that order and start with the least important and work to the most important. So depending on what category or what topic you're choosing to write your process on will determine how you arrange the essay. So if you are writing on the topic of spending a weekend in lacrosse on the cheap, you could arrange it by Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or you could arrange it by outdoors versus indoor activities, or you could arrange it by eating versus leisure activities. So you get to determine how you arrange everything. You want to have some kind of intro that gets your reader interested. I always encourage my students to write their intros later. When you have written your intro later, you then have an idea of what you're writing about. And sometimes if we start with the intro, that can prohibit us from moving forward quickly. So start with the body and come back to the intro. You can use I don't want you to use numbered steps. I want you to use paragraphs for this essay. But as you're brainstorming, you can certainly use numbered steps to get through everything. If there are equipment or tools that we need up front, just like a recipe, tell us those in your intro. So tell us how much money we would need or what kind of products or equipment we would need. For a lot of the topics you're writing about, you don't necessarily need either, but you might find that you want to recommend something. If there are any things that the reader could do that would harm them or harm others. So for instance, if you're writing about failing college, well, that can harm your GPA. It can harm your chances of getting into other colleges and universities. And it can definitely harm your wallet, your bank account. So if you're writing about that, even if you're doing it from a humorous standpoint, you want to tell your reader, hey, just a heads up, if you're planning to fail college, here are some of the consequences. And with that being said, if you do choose to write about failing college, you're certainly welcome to take it in a sort of tongue-in-cheek manner. I've had students have some fun with that. I did not do well in my second year of college. I basically flunked out and had a really horrible GPA, and I had fun, but I also learned a very hard lesson. So I could kind of sarcastically or ironically talk about what you can do to fail college and what it will mean for you if you do. So that is something that you want to take into account. What are the things that I need my audience to know up front that could be harmful? Your transitions, as with any essay, will be important. So again, think about whether it's sequential, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, you have to follow these exact steps, or if you're using things like consequently or at the same time or more importantly. Those are all transitional phrases that you can use to move yourself through it. These next few slides are just giving you examples of how to start thinking about writing down a process. So know we're in the midst of gardening season here, and I'm going to hopefully be buying more plants this weekend. And there's not just, digging a hole and sticking the plant in it. There's more to it than that. And so if I were to write a process on that, I might need to chunk up my steps and have different headings or different categories. So there's prepping the soil, selecting the plants, actual planting them, and then you have to maintain water. And then if you have a fruit-bearing plant, you have to do something with it once it blooms. So if you wanted to do this activity on your own, you're welcome to, but brainstorm something like getting a tattoo. What are the steps involved? If you have one and you have a friend who comes to you and asks, hey, I'm thinking about this, what should I do? What's some of the advice that you've been given or you would give to make sure that would be a pleasurable experience for the person? So that is a little bit about process analysis, which is the first essay you'll be writing on. Do note that you have a couple of specific topics that I'm asking you to stick to for this first one. You'll have more leniency in future essays, but I'd like you to stick to these for the